My name is Chris Rogers. I'm a technology evangelist at Zerto, a HP company. So when we're talking about Kubernetes, this is obviously a new experience. It's new for me. It's something that I've had to pick up over the last couple of years, and I'm sure it's new to a lot of people in the room. Maybe there's some experts as well, so you can catch me out on some of the terminology and things later on. But so we're talking about this hybrid cloud landscape again. Actually, Zerto for Kubernetes fulfills all of these use cases. So no matter where you're running these Kubernetes applications and what you're trying to do with them, we can actually serve for all of these use cases. So what does Zerto for Kubernetes actually do? So if you know Zerto well, you'd probably have to take a really good guess. But if you're maybe not so familiar with Zerto, maybe you are working in that DevOps world natively and you haven't come across Zerto in the traditional sense. So essentially providing continuous backup, DR, mobility, long-term retention for your Kubernetes applications. And that doesn't matter where they're running, on premises, in the cloud, the hybrid between the two, whatever it may be, doesn't matter to us. So what does Zerto for Kubernetes? I'm actually going to call it Z4K, if that's okay with everyone. Zerto for Kubernetes is a bit of a mouthful for me to say all the time, so I'm going to call it Z4K. So what does this look like? So first of all, I'm going to run through these in a bit more detail, but data protection as code. So putting data protection in the hands of the people who are running and doing the Kubernetes workloads. So making sure that that's in the language that they understand and not breaking out into things they don't want to do. Utilizing simple workflows. We want to try and minimize the barriers for data protection inside of Kubernetes environments. If it's cumbersome, if it's difficult, it just won't get done. Simple as that. It's all about agility and speed in cloud native. So we want to make sure it's simple and easy to use. The whole point of Kubernetes and cloud native workloads is that they're portable, right? We can use them anywhere we want, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't want to be stuck in a particular vendor or a particular storage platform maybe that we've chosen. We want to have that freedom of choice to move our applications or provision our applications or even have data protection across clouds if we want to. Enabling analytics so we know what's happening with our environment, because that's important for day two operations as well. Everyone focuses on, continuous integration, continuous delivery, but it's also about making sure those applications are running as they should. And that's the same for data protection for Kubernetes applications as well. I think I'd be kicked out of every DevOps room if I said we don't have any automation, we don't have an API to use, sorry. So obviously we have an API and automation, but again, using languages and commandlets that they already understand. And then application-centric approach, making sure that the developers protect everything in an application as one entity, again, making sure that comes across. And of course, continuous data protection. So we are the only vendor that can do continuous data protection for Kubernetes workloads. And I think why is that important? For me, I feel like VMs can live for days, weeks, months, years. I think I've seen VMs around for decades, right? They're kind of there, they kind of live forever. But with Kubernetes workloads and containers, sometimes those applications and those containers aren't around all the time, right? They're there for maybe sometimes hours and days. Probably we're not going to see many Kubernetes applications with uptimes of years like we do with virtual machines, right? We're probably going to see them in a different light. So we need to make sure that we're always on. There's no point in waiting to back up that Kubernetes application and protect its underlying data in an evening or at night, because it may have not even be there anymore. So we need to make sure that everything's on a continuous basis. Granular journal-based recovery is important as well. So making sure we utilize Zerto's journal to go back and minimize data loss in these applications as well. These applications change loads and loads and loads, just like virtual machines do. So we need to make sure we minimize data loss. No matter what app you're running in and what format, whether it's Kubernetes, SaaS, or VMs, or whatever it may be, we don't like data loss. No one likes to lose data. So making sure we minimize that. And also, just having no data loss and no downtime, unlocking RPOs of seconds and RTOs of minutes for all your Kubernetes applications. So I said I was going to go through some of those things in a bit. So here we go. So the first one, data protection as code. So the idea of this is that instead of having a DevOps engineer or a software engineer or a developer, whatever title you want to use for them, going into their Kubernetes application, deploying it, coding it, and letting it run, and then having to split out into a completely separate window, maybe on a UI, or maybe they've got a CLI thread as well, but something completely separate to then have to do data operations after that's been deployed. It seems a little bit backwards to us. So what we've done is we're actually using annotations inside of the Kubernetes application itself to add resources to Zerto protection groups. So that at the point of the developer actually creating the application and pushing it out into Kubernetes, the point it gets deployed, it's born protected. There isn't anything you can do After that, you have to go in and then delete the annotation if you want to remove it, right? So at the point that it's created, they're born protected. So there's no missing a data operation. There's no forgetting to add it to backup, because guess what? It's already being done as soon as the application is deployed. And again, that's going to be the same. So all they need to do is, if they add a component, go in and annotate that component. It's going to add it into the virtual protection group as well. And that means this becomes incredibly easy to integrate into those dev life cycles that we're used to, and those guys are used to running already. They don't want to be having to flip out into UIs and do things differently. They want to be able to simply integrate into their CI/CD workflows that they currently use. We want to make things easy as possible, so data protection doesn't get forgotten or gets put in that too difficult category. Because obviously, these are expensive resources. Software engineers and DevOps, these are expensive resources. We're wasting their time getting them to log into tools they're not familiar with or anything else like that. It's going to cause friction in the organization. So we're using the same commandlets for operations that developers are using to manage Kubernetes today. So kubectl get VPGs, for instance, would get you a list of all the virtual protection groups you have configured inside of Zerto. kubectl get checkpoints would get you all the checkpoints you need. So again, we're not introducing any language or anything that developers need to relearn, or a completely new language or a completely new tool for them to have to go out and do. We're trying to integrate data protection into the Kubernetes stack as best as possible.
So thinking about it from spinning this up, and protecting my Kubernetes workloads. Mm-hmm. Say I have my manifest, I spin the pods up and everything like that. I protect it with Zerto, mm-hmm. but I destroy it. So then I spin it back up again. Does it link to the existing Zerto protection for that pod, or does it come up as net new? Just purely from that perspective, or is that an option?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure on the behavior of that. I will double check, but we do have the option. Essentially, you can keep long-term copies of the data, so we can archive long-term copies off, which obviously won't ever change. Okay. So when we're talking about Kubernetes applications, it's obvious that people want to be able to develop wherever they want to develop on, right? So whether that's a choice of AKS, EKS, whatever it may be. But now we're seeing workloads, especially more controlled industries, FSI and defense and those places, things like that having to really look at those cloud environments, not saying they're not secure, but actually saying, would it be better to run some Kubernetes on premise as well and have this hybrid cloud approach? So workloads we can run in the public cloud, we will do, but those apps that we're modernizing, maybe we don't want to run those directly in the public cloud. So maybe we're going to run this hybrid cloud Kubernetes instead. So whether it's OpenShift or VMware Tanzu, whatever it may be. But again, with Zerto, we're completely agnostic across that stack. So you can have this replicating from a VMware Tanzu across to OpenShift on premises, and then also up into EKS and AKS at the same time. So 3 copies of the data in 3 different clouds and 3 different geos. Well, you name it, we can replicate the data there, right? So it's really giving that power back. So we're not going to be looking at an underlying storage platform and saying you have to use a particular storage platform to protect that data. It's purely inside the Kubernetes. The way we're doing continuous data protection, we've actually built that driver inside of the Kubernetes engine as well. So that is intercepting writes as it flows through Kubernetes, and not once it's landed, not once it's doing once it's taking snapshots of the storage. It's again the CDP, as you know from VMware and our VMs, integrated into Kubernetes as well. And then to contradict myself completely and say we had no UI, I lied a little bit. But for the people who are configuring this at Z4K on every day, they're going to want to be doing it in the terminal. They're going to want to be doing that. But one thing we have found is that a lot of day 2 operations, especially things like monitoring, that type of thing, is not going to be down to DevOps. Even though the ops side of that could be monitoring and things, you could still monitor from inside the terminal. You can use your commandlets and get all the information you need. We've actually ported all those analytics into Zerto Analytics, the SaaS platform we have available for our virtual machines and workloads today. So if you're running a NOC or a SOC or someone like that who maybe hasn't got those deep Kubernetes or developer skills, you can still monitor and monitor and have that visibility of across all your estates. So maybe you are one of these hybrid companies who have got VMs protected with Zerto. You've got Kubernetes that's also protected with Zerto. Maybe you've got some Zerto in cloud for AWS, which we're going to come on to in a moment. Maybe you've got all of this, but you want to have that monitored in a single place. So we can be pulling that information out and building it into a nice UI for you to view. So if your NOC or SOC staff don't want to hash away at the terminal to find all the information, they can see it in a nice simple view here. So when I said we don't have a UI, we do. I lied a little bit. And then APIs and automations. So built-in orchestration and built-in automation. So exactly the same as what we have in our core product for Zerto for VMware. or Zerto for VMs, sorry, those orchestration automations still apply. So we still have simple commandlets like kubectl failover, which does exactly what it says in the tin, right? It fails over those applications that you want into your secondary or tertiary environments. The same for failover testing. It's the same, simple to do. That means we can kind of really easily integrate with Jenkins, Ansible, and all those other things that you're going to be that the developers are going to be using to help you automate. So maybe you've got an Ansible runbook or a Jenkins pipeline that's going to run failover testing for all these applications once a week, right? We can just build that in. It's built into the same commandlets and same things that we have already there. And then application-centric. So I think I've probably covered this as well, but actually making sure that we group everything together that makes up that application, rather than just the persistent data. The persistent data is fine if we want to protect just that. But actually, when we're looking at disaster recovery, we've then got to try and get that data with the application tied up, in sync, etc., etc. So what we're doing is we're actually having the deployment, stateful sets, services, config maps, all the things that you are used to. I mean, so all those points in one place. So grouping those all together in a virtual protection group, making sure that that application is protected as a single entity, and then for recovered. So we look at the Z4K architecture. So 3 components this time, but one of them you already recognize, Zerto Virtual Replication Appliance. So the VRAs handles the replication exactly the same. That is 1 per worker node. The Zerto Kubernetes Manager, this is the management component as well, and this sits anywhere you like it to. This can sit in a completely separate cluster of Kubernetes if you want, away from where you're productioning your DR is. And then we have a Zerto Kubernetes Manager proxy, which essentially is the communication between the pods that you're deploying and the cluster and the management as well. So it's very simple, and it's built for Kubernetes on Kubernetes. So we're not having to worry about deploying VMs to protect it. We're not just protecting the underlying virtual machines either, we're protecting more than just that. So if we look at the flexible architecture here, we've got a production cluster, maybe that's running EKS, AKS. We've got a separate Zerto cluster, maybe that's running in Google Cloud. And then we've got a DR cluster, maybe running OpenShift. But all these components then run in its own namespace in Kubernetes. It's deployable via Helm, so the same charts and the same ways that people are deploying Kubernetes applications or Kubernetes itself, we're deploying Zerto with that as well. And all these components are, again, purpose-built from the ground up for Kubernetes as well. So why would you choose that over Kubernetes? Well, I think three things. So the continuous availability. No matter where your application is running, people want an always-on experience. So that's what we're bringing to Zerto for Kubernetes. Operational efficiency, streamlining those resources and unifying those DevOps teams, making sure they don't have to go out and learn a new tool, integrating it as closely into their current work as they're currently doing. And the multi-cloud agility, protecting workloads to, from, between on-premises, clouds, whatever you want to do with your Kubernetes application, wherever you're running, that's fine with us. You can use that.